This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Bordeaux-Renee. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, hosts of the show. And today, our guest is Anthony Laney.
Anthony is an architect and founder of Laney LA. I mean, I think he's a repeat guest in the show, so he doesn't need another introduction.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, anyone who's unfamiliar with Anthony, you can go back and listen to the other. I think we've had him on twice before.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing to have repeat conversations. But what's awesome is they recently published their first monograph. Mm-hmm. And so we talked with Anthony in great detail about what's in the book, the thinking behind it, how they approached it, how it shaped their office, and how it's shaping their thinking moving forward, their plans for another book. I think we really went into great detail in all of that stuff, and then went off in tangents about work and philosophy of architecture and concept design versus schematic design, clients, the whole thing.
Yeah, it was a really great conversation, as always, with Anthony. I think, the fact that he's so willing in sharing like what he's learning and his mission and kind of like everything in between is phenomenal. And I wish, more architects would be that way. So I'm sure all of you will find it a very delightful conversation.
Sponsors.
Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap to low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to find out more. This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter, more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes.
This is The Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Anthony. Here we go.
Bye-bye.
The cool thing that recently happened for you guys is you released your first monograph. And that's a huge deal. Congratulations. I got to see the book last night. I just saw you like 12 hours ago. And it's an amazing book. I mean, the work we're pretty familiar with already. The book itself was amazing. All of it really comes together very nicely. So I guess the first question I have is, like, talk us through the thinking. Did you always know that you would produce a monograph? Like, how did you decide that was going to be a worthwhile endeavor, or did you ever think, well, maybe it's not even worth it because we kind of live in an age where, we have websites and social media, like what's the point of doing the printed version?
Yes, great question. There was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning, but about 3 years ago, we started flirting with the idea of could we engage in an exercise where we tried to curate our own portfolio in a way that felt meaningful. And so because it was our first time doing it, there was a lot of uncertainty about how much effort it would take and what would be the process and the outcome. But the motivation was to reflect on a diverse range of projects and see if we could, for ourselves, help clarify what we were about and where we wanted to focus more in the future. Having done dozens and dozens of projects, it was quite a challenge to pick just 9 homes and to tell their story in a way that felt cohesive and significant. And my favorite part, David, was the way that it kind of brought our studio together to clarify what we stood for, what are the convictions that we've developed over the last 10 years. And it's something we're really proud of.
I think that's very interesting to do a monograph for this reason. I feel like a lot of offices lately do monographs, but it's much more about maybe just the final product, like the work, the final work. And I think it's interesting that in your case, you're thinking about basically what you guys have done and where you're trying to stay focused in, which I think is very clever.
I appreciate that. We love our architectural library. We buy a lot of books from Hennessy and Ingalls, but we did have the conviction that we didn't want this to just be a portfolio. I know that's easy to say. And so obviously it takes a lot of effort to design a home and make a client happy and bring it to life
Yeah.
and get it photographed. But that effort was already done, and so the effort
Mm-hmm.
of publishing a book for us went into the crafting of the essays or the telling of the stories. Um, how do you give it a beginning, a middle, and an end, and what are the beliefs
Mm.
that we want to explore from a more like philosophical perspective. And so we for about 2 years we met once a week as a studio and debated and argued, and it probably sounded like conflict, but for us that's kind of the process that we love. And we ultimately landed on organizing the book into these 5 sections, these 5 chapters: the place of home, the sense of home, the rhetoric of home, the rhythm of home, and the authorship of home. And that those became the 5 buckets around which we just kind of explored our own convictions and ultimately resulted in crafting 5 essays to create the structure for the book.
So you started the process a few years ago, and at that point, you knew that was going to culminate in a book, or were you thinking just broadly in the office, like we have to figure out a way to reflect on our work, or was the book really a known factor from that point in time a few years ago, the known
But
goal?
there was a dual motivation. We wanted to experiment with the challenge of doing a publication, and at the same
Yeah.
time, we knew that that would force us to clarify our own convictions. When we started the process, the projects that we were most interested in were not yet complete, but we knew that in a couple years they would be complete. And
Well,
when we launched the practice 10 years ago, we were doing teeny tiny projects. Most were not even close to being worthy of publication. But for the first time, we felt we were within reach of having some more substantial projects. And that kind of gave us the courage to give it a shot.
and so remind me again, how many projects are in the book?
9.
9?
Nine
And so
projects,
are
nine
they
homes. Mm-hmm.
9 homes, right? And so for people listening who have not yet purchased the book, but they will, are the 9 projects, is it 2 for each of the 5 categories, and then one of the categories has 1 project, or how does that?
That's exactly right. Most of the chapters have 2 example projects that relate to the theme of the essay, and then one of the chapters has just 1 home.
I mean, yeah, I think it's all very, very interesting. I mean, as you know, for a lot of architecture offices and architects, one of the questions that I think we all ask ourselves is like, what is the type of work that we do? Like, what is the work that we do? And obviously, it's architecture. We could assign style labels like modern or contemporary or whatever. But like, what is the manifesto behind the work? Let's say, and I feel like sometimes amongst architects, it's a really difficult question, and sometimes there's an attempt or a desire to almost be too preoccupied with that too soon. Like to figure out your identity as an office, as an architect, too early on for various reasons. Maybe you're being asked all the time. Maybe you feel that pressure from the academic side of architecture, that we look to the heroes. They all have their mission statement, let's say, or it's because from a let's say marketing standpoint, having an identity helps people understand who you are. And so I'm also curious, like bigger picture, did it take like for you in the search of the identity of your office, do you think that this book is really like a strong step in solidifying that direction, or did you have an understanding of what that was going to be 5 years ago? Like, does it take time before you develop that clarity?
For us, it was much more discovered rather than being prescribed. And probably
Mm.
because we were a young office, we took projects in all sorts of typologies. Some we were proud of, some we weren't proud of. And so it really did take a decade for us to, first of all, grow comfortable with the focus exclusively on designing homes. For the first 6 years, we were doing projects of all sorts of typologies. And so I think, again, the discipline of doing the book forced us to recognize what was already happening. And I think that created a kind of the virtuous cycle of, now that we have the language that can more accurately describe who we are, what we do, and what we believe in, I do think that that gives us the right amount of conviction and courage to pursue that with greater focus. And so there can be uncertainty as a young office to say, like, hey, can we afford to only focus on this singular typology? But when our whole team rallies around it and we feel like I'm not saying 9 homes is a substantial body of work, but when we have the beginning of a portfolio we're proud of, I think it helps propel us in the direction that we want to keep going.
I think that's good. If
I think 9 is a good body of work for sure.
If you have 9 projects that you're very proud of,
Yeah.
I think after a decade of work, I think that's phenomenal. And I'm sure people who are not in this industry are like, that's crazy. 9 to 10 doesn't seem like that many, but it's a lot because they take the projects. I mean, what's the average like time span or life of each of those projects from beginning till completion in photography?
For us, it takes about 14 months from meeting the client to starting construction. And then it takes about 2.5 years to build the home. And then it'll probably take several more months, usually about 6 months, to truly complete, let the landscape come in, schedule the photographer. So it's a long process. And, we didn't even land our first ground up clients till several years in our existence. So yeah, for us, I don't think we could have done the book sooner, just because of the patience it took to get there. But we are excited about the momentum that it's given us. And I know this might be a little bit premature, but we're excited for the second one because the projects on the boards, in my opinion, are even more exciting than the projects in the book. And one day those will come to life too.
Yeah, that's a funny thing too. Like we were speaking with, who was it? It might have been a landscape architect, and they were remarking. We were talking about some of the recent work that was, published online or in a magazine or something, and they were, of course, happy to talk about it. But they also said, it's kind of a weird thing because I'm not personally super proud of it because that was done so long ago. Like we've evolved way past that. So like what we have going on, where they are now, in current time, is so different from what was published and what everyone thinks of them because of it takes a long, and then publications take, in the case of like magazines or whatever, it takes forever. It's an odd. Yeah, these projects take a really long time for sure.
Was it hard to kind of like look back at those projects and try and remember the narrative or the story behind it and all of that? Because I don't know how disciplined you are with taking notes and, keeping journal for each project and all of those things, but there's just so many thoughts that goes and comes in and out through the process that I can't imagine going back on 9 project and, trying to be clear and sharp and have a good memory of basically what happened.
Yeah, I love that question, Marina. Without the book as our target, there's no way we would have spent this amount of time pausing, reflecting, and critiquing. That would not have happened. I just don't have the personal discipline for that. And even more to your question,
I doubt that. I doubt that, Anthony.
Well,
you're the most disciplined people we know.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can relate to the other landscape architect you just mentioned, David, where our current focus and energy is always on the future. We're always serving our current clients. And so to look backwards doesn't always feel natural. To make it even worse, to Marina's question, often the design teams aren't even present in our office in the way that they were, let's say, 6 years ago when we designed the project. And so part of that is a challenge, right? How do we perfectly remember with accuracy all the steps along the way? But part of it was a breath of fresh air because the room was filled with architects and thinkers, my team, who are a little bit more detached from this work, and they can identify the gap between what we aspired to achieve and what we actually achieved. And I really think that's an interesting gap that is worth exploring. Like, what did the project actually accomplish versus, what was our premise in the beginning? And so I really enjoyed that reflection. And I don't know, I think I've probably overstated this point now many times, but I think that was the main value of the exercise for us.
So of the 9 projects, when you guys, I'm thinking of timeline, when you guys started having these brainstorming or discussion sessions to figure out the essence of each one and how it would be described, there must have been projects though that were either completed or like nearly or done with design when you started those conversations. So I forget my question now. So or was it like those discussions were really overlapped? Well, no, they weren't because you said 6 years ago. So I guess my question is like, that space between the say initial idea, let's put it that way, versus what was
Mm-hmm.
executed. It's funny too because I think some architects would immediately interpret that as like, well, if what was executed was not what I thought it would be, or is not also even furthermore interpreted the way I wanted it to be interpreted or read, then somehow it's not as successful. Which I don't necessarily believe that, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was hard to decide when do we press publish, because if we would have waited another year, there were several projects we could have included. But to your question about um, the gap between our aspiration and what we actually achieved, I'm not. Um, I do think that it's possible for a project to fall below um, the ambitions that we set, and sometimes that happens. But I also think that there's something timeless about designing homes, and what homes teach us are often a reflection of truth and reality and the way life and families work. And so, our essays are not only about our personal design ambitions, but it's also just about what designing homes have taught us. And so I think it
Mm.
gets even more interesting when an architect can step back in a little bit of a detached way and just recognize uh, what were the challenges, what were the setbacks, what were the surprises, even in the process, and how that can impact your convictions moving forward.
So talk us through each of the different five essays or way of understanding the home. You mentioned at the beginning
Yes.
what they are, but I'm curious to know a bit more on what each of those means in a bit of greater detail.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the first one. The first chapter is called The Place of Home. And so we frame this as a debate between two schools of thought within architecture. The first would be the genius loci, meaning the spirit of a place. And those are the architects who believe that for every place, there is a soul or this like primary characteristic that is already present, and the good architecture should respond to that place. On the other side of the spectrum would be the tabula rasa argument that place is truly a blank slate, and we can kind of import into the place our own meaning, and therefore architecture is not just responding to place, but it's kind of like creating the meaning for the place. And so we explore the history of those two ideas. We think LA often relates more to the tabula rasa to such a degree that almost becomes the genius loci. So I've kind of folded these ideas on each other. Most of my clients, a lot of them are not from LA, but they hire us to do a special home, on the beach in Los Angeles. And for them, it's this fresh start. And so we're a lot of our discovery phase is tapping into their desire to do something that's very escapist. And so we're
Mm.
tracing the origins of those ideas and exploring our own convictions around how much should architecture be responsive to a pre-existing characteristic, and to what extent do we have permission to kind of define that fresh.
That's a,
That's a great start to a book.
I could see where that would
Yeah.
spark a lot of debate between a handful of architects.
Yes,
How did you
yes, yes.
even finish conversations in the office with that one?
Well, I mean, David, I feel like those debates are present whether we recognize it or not. And we just find it's
Huh.
helpful
Yeah.
to very simply put words to it so that people can discover, oh, I have convictions here. They just haven't been in the front of my mind recently. And that leads to, I think, very interesting client interactions about whether the home is more of a backdrop or whether the home is more of, the protagonist. And again, all architecture answers these questions. It's just about whether
Yeah.
it is in the front of our mind or not.
This is actually an interesting topic. We were talking yesterday, the two of us, about modern architecture and what modern architects are, and kind of like it's more of a thinking and approach than necessarily like a form or a design exercise. Do you think that, maybe as a way to generalize modern architects, but do you think that modern architects tend to be on one side or the other, based on those two camps?
The genius loci versus tabula rasa.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, so I think that the early modernists embraced tabula rasa, but I think since then
Yeah.
there has been a reaction toward regionalism, which I think would be more of the genius loci. And today everything is so pluralistic. You can find examples of quote unquote contemporary architects who land in both categories. But even if your convictions are a blend, I still feel it's useful to be able to articulate what those are and to defend them.
I fully agree. So how do you go about that for each project, and how much in determining where that balance lies? And it's obviously not as simple as like just a single, I think about things graphically as a single bar spectrum. There's a lot of different dimensions to how we could think about the blank slate versus responding to the context. There's a lot of different ways that can be thought about. But for you, how do you approach that thinking? And are there certain things that should always be thought about, the local or contextual things that should always be brought into the project? And that's kind of like a non-negotiable, let's say. Like, how do you thread the needle?
I don't know if I'm smart enough to totally answer that, but I'll give you some of the ways that we approach it, given the work that we do. In a suburban context, I'm just going to be candid, I'm not always proud of the place. And so we are often trying to erase or edit the context and create these little walled gardens because I don't know if the genius loci, the spirit of the place in a true suburban context, is timeless and rich in a way that is worth always celebrating. Sometimes it is. But when you're in a natural environment, that's where I think the genius loci, the spirit of the place, can be so palpable and can often become one of the most relevant starting points for a design. I think the most interesting blend for us is where you have some significant natural feature meeting an urban or semi-suburban context, like a dense row of homes right on the Pacific Ocean, right? Behind you, there might be this kind of strange suburban context, but in front of you, there might be the most romantic, uninterrupted horizon line. And so that the way, one side of the architecture responds to that and the other side of the architecture turns its back on that, is, I think, a very practical starting point, at least in our work.
What you said makes complete sense. And actually, your commentary about like suburbia is an interesting one. And I agree with it. And I don't think, and I appreciate the candor, and I don't think you're being rude about it at all. I mean, let's be honest. We all know that like the majority of structures built don't qualify as quote architecture in our minds, or just by any definition. They're just kind of crappy spec buildings. It's also interesting with like suburban plots, because if you think about it, what's fascinating about suburbia, especially the backyard, which is kind of the main gathering exterior area these days, it's not really about context whatsoever. Like the idea of suburbia, right? It's everyone has their own plot, and that's really your own universe and your own private space. And it's just about you and that space. It has nothing to do with, I mean, that's part of like the dream of suburbia, right? It's to have your own fenced off area that's your home. And it doesn't really matter where it is. I mean, it's provided you have the blue sky of LA or whatever it is. Like nothing else is really about that experience, especially when we get to the backyard. So it makes perfect sense that, there's not much to respond to on those three sides, the sides and the back.
That would be an example, David, of the suburban backyard would be an example of the tabula rasa, where you are unapologetically turning your back in ignorance to whatever is 3 feet away from you on the other side of the fence.
That 3 feet. I feel like a lot of times our job is to make that 3 feet feel like 100 yards.
That's right.
Yeah, which is, it's what it is. If we had a project where the backyard was quite large, and they actually had like a really nice. They were fortunate because they had neighbors on one side, but mostly shrouded by trees. The neighbors at the back was like a community something. So they had a big open space beyond their backyard that was filled with trees and stuff, then a vacant lot. So you really couldn't see a whole lot. And the whole idea that they wanted was like, I want to plant a few new trees to hide the few slivers of other houses I can see, because beyond that there's mountains. And so if we do that and we craft the fences correctly, like you don't it's placeless. It's like going back to the idea of an escape, like you're saying, like you really feel that sense of escape. And even though you do actually have some neighbors that are right over there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a clever trick.
Yeah, I was wondering, based on you guys' experience, if you find that responding, let's say, to to context or not, like which one is let's say, the hardest to work with? I feel like sometimes when the landscape is so beautiful as the context, it seems to me like it would be even harder to respond to that, because what else could you do, that's going to be better than what was there before we started building anything?
Well, if it's a waterfall,
right?
You put the house on top of it, if you're right.
In the same time, if you start with, in the same time, if you start with a suburban backyard that has nothing and you're creating everything from zero, it seems like the possibilities are endless and unlimited. So where do you also even start?
Right. Good question.
Boy, great question. Well, I find that when I am intimately familiar with the context, that becomes quite an advantage, and my convictions come quickly. And when I am totally ignorant of a context, the beginner's mind kicks in and my team goes into research mode. To answer your question directly, which is the hardest context to respond to? I think it's the context where we assume we're familiar with it, but we're not truly native. And then I think that's where we get into dangerous territory. So, like, because we've done a lot of beach homes, if we are invited to do a beach home 100 miles away from the beaches that we know, those are the tricky ones where I think we can fall into some bad habits of assuming that we are aware of the forces at play, when really we should treat it as if we're ignorant of it and just embrace the beginner's mind and try to find the experts and the documentation and like truly listen to what's possible.
I think that's
like
great.
that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
The
kind of like going against your your own preconception of even sometimes like your own work, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's. I think that larger point is something that we all face, and I feel like in the offices I've worked at, and I know for ourselves, if we for any project kind of take some of the fundamental information for granted, we just assume it's a given, whether it be about site or something else, and we carry that from one project to the next. Inherently, at some point in the design process, we just start to feel like there's something not right with what we're doing. It just, I don't know how to say it other than that it just didn't feel right. And then we start to unpack it, and it's like, yeah, it's because we made this basically an assumption. Why did we do that? And then you start to poke at it and you're like, okay, that was the thing. Like we just assumed that this ingredient was going to be here, and that's why it's not tasting right. But it's a very difficult thing to do, to catch those moments, or to be sensible to them, aware of them, sensitive to them rather.
Exactly. I think you nailed it. I think that it sounds simple, but the goal is heightened awareness so that we don't make those dangerous assumptions, but that we label them together as a collective team.
And so and now we're kind of deviating, which is totally fine. But in your office, in the design process, do you guys have like weekly, bi-weekly pinups during the design process do you have everyone in the studio looking at the work together? Like, how does the discourse take place to make sure that the design is evolving in the correct manner?
Yeah, we have our weekly Friday team talk, which is this like sacred slot where the whole team comes together and we are discussing and very much debating whatever the chosen topic is. And often that is a current project. Sometimes it's a brand new project, because I feel like the juiciest conversations are when the premise is still undefined, where we're deciding what truly is the objective and what truly is the right strategy, and like what geometric operations are appropriate to even explore. The part of the process that is my favorite is the beginning. It's the discovery phase, where we very intentionally refuse to create a solution. All we're doing is trying to excavate all of the opportunities and constraints at play. And I think the architectural industry, and I might even say, a compliment to the architectural education is to lean into the excavation of those opportunities and constraints before prescribing a solution.
Yep. Yep. And so what does that look, so for the layperson, what does that mean? The excavation of I don't know, whatever, whatever you said. I get what you said. I don't
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
what you said, but what does
Sorry.
that mean
Yeah.
practically?
So we clients hire us to design homes. So when we say excavate opportunities, that means what's on their wish list, what's even possible on the site, what are certain views, what are certain choreographed ways of moving through the project, what are special moments that are possible here, and constraints would be all of the code and city regulations that we cannot break. And so we want to map those visually before we challenge ourselves to invent a design solution.
And how long do you typically allot for that part of the process? Are we talking about a week, 2 weeks?
Great question. For us, it's 1 month, and that would be two client meetings. The first meeting is simply a kickoff where we do a detailed lifestyle interview. And the second meeting is where we are responding to that with additional follow up questions. And so, after about 4 weeks of work, I think we have the major items in place. And then we move into what we call the concept phase, which is all about attempting to define the relationship between the building and the site. So we're not yet looking at room placement, but we're looking at how does the land, that which pre-existed our involvement, and our contribution, how do those two things interact? So that would be one objective of the concept phase. And the second objective would be exploring the architectural language that is most suited to address the concerns of the client. So is the home dispersed across the site in multiple small buildings, or is it collected in one single tall moment? Is it interrupted by outdoor spaces in the middle, or is all the outdoor space pushed to one side of the lot? So those are
Mm-hmm.
that would be what comes after that first step.
And so in that phase, you're not putting down program, or you have a loose idea of program? I would assume you do. So the massings you're doing are not like totally off the mark.
Exactly, you nailed it. So we make sure the program is loose, because if the program were tight, I think that would limit the number of solutions we come up from a conceptual level. But by keeping the program loose, it enables us to go broader in our exploration of the relationship between the architecture and the site.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We are always kind of rethinking our process in the office, and one of the things that we began to integrate, actually very recently, was the concept design phase. So it's the
Okay.
questions I'm asking are very selfish. I'm just curious to see how you guys work, and well, because it's interesting. So I'll share this with you. Like, um,
Please.
y- a lot of times in the past when we've done remodels, the scope is so much more controlled, and the parameters are so much more is significant that
Mhm.
it's much easier to immediately jump into floor plan mode, let's say, or elevation mode, like architectural drawing mode, because the route is you just don't, the budget's whatever it is, the scope is tighter. But when you have a ground up project, it is very, for us at least, I found it is dangerous territory to jump too early, prematurely into floor plan and architectural drawing mode, and not giving time and space to what you described, which is, I guess you would say like kind of like massing and but it's interesting with your description too, because you're talking about massing, but it's program layered on top of that is also architectural thinking, even if you haven't, started sketching out like where walls and doors and windows go.
I think that's exactly right. I'm reminded of one of the books that inspired our monograph. It's called The Poetics of Music by Igor Stravinsky. And he has this wonderful quote. He was a composer. And he said, "My freedom will be so much greater and more meaningful the more narrowly I limit my field of action and the more I surround myself with obstacles." And so, in a renovation,
Yeah.
like you said, David, those obstacles are visual and very clear. And when working perhaps with more of the tabula rasa site, a blank slate, those can be present, but they might be harder to find, harder to see. They're more intuitive. And so that's where I feel like it's so important to pause and identify those. Otherwise, we're designers, we're trigger happy. We're happy to just start drawing.
It's true.
I don't know if that always leads to the most meaningful work. That's right.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So then do you guys have to, in the cases where there are less constraints, I think that, let's say for the sake of this conversation, we're saying that when there's more constraints, in a way it's easier because you have things to react to and respond to give meaning to decisions that you're making. When there's not those obstacles to react to, do you have to develop a architectural concept for each project, and that would serve as the not the obstacle, but the rail that you can work up against, or lanes that you work within to give direction and meaning to the decisions? Because architectural concepts is something we're taught in school, but not a lot of offices. I mean, I don't know if it's common in most offices to think about that anymore.
I like the question. Each project that we included in the monograph, on the very first page of the chapter, is the partie diagram. It represents the architectural concept. So for us, we would define that as what is the essential organizing characteristic. And you're right, when the constraint is not directly applied by the site, the concept can actually become part of that structure for us to push against. And so, readers can judge to what extent we were successful there, but we're trying to be transparent in diagramming very simply what our attempt was.
And now a little break for our show sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Chaos. They make award-winning design and visualization tools, and they're really pushing the boundaries with AI. Now, AI is shaking up the architecture and design world, and Chaos is taking a responsible approach. Their tools are built to help architects, designers, and visualization specialists to work faster and explore more ideas without replacing creativity. Basically, Chaos wants AI to make your imagination stronger, not take over. So you get to design with more freedom, create stunning visuals, and stay in control of your work. If you want to see what that looks like, tap the Chaos link in our show notes.
Dear architects, design leaders, and founders redefining the industry, if you want to shape not only buildings, but the business behind them, this is your moment. Future London Academy's Executive MBA takes you inside the boardrooms of Pentagram, Uber, Zaha Hadid Architects, and Google, where you'll master finance, strategy, and operations from the people who already excel at them. Study along peers transforming the industry worldwide, and do it all in just 9 intensive weeks over 1 year between London and California. The program is award-winning, transformative, and crafted for design and architecture leaders with 15 or more years of experience. If you're ready to grow your impact, apply now by tapping the Future London Academy link in our show notes. Say goodbye to design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project, from mood boards to advanced specification tools to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Share your work in the format that works for you, be it PDF spec sheets or online branded client dashboards with always up-to-date specification details. Join interior design movers and shakers and start for free by clicking the Programma link in our show notes. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for interior design workflows. Yep. It's such an interesting thing, this whole design process.
Are the clients surprised in the first, few, let's say, concept meetings where they don't really see plans, they don't really see like what it's gonna be? Like, how do you keep them, excited and kind of like patient in, kind of like trusting the process and trusting that eventually they're gonna see what it's gonna look like, but that's not how we start.
I love that question. So 2 answers. Earlier in our journey, there was more of a leap because we could not show a client a finished home that had a clear concept. And now with a growing portfolio, we have a little bit more ammunition. But I think there's something else that is the key to unlock here. And there's this phenomenon called the knowledge attachment correlation. And it means we tend to grow more attached to things that we understand well. Or in other words, as comprehension grows, appreciation and affection grows. And so this is my theory, and you know, other architects are going to disagree with this, and that's fine. But architectural concepts can sometimes be too esoteric, where we lose our clients. But David and Marina, if I can keep a client not only interested in the concept, but if they can fall in love with it because they understand every piece of logic behind it, it becomes like they become such an invested partner in the creative process. And so we want to make sure that both in the discovery phase and the concept phase, our clients are growing in their attachment to the main ideas, because there will be many forces, schedule, budget, practical forces that are going to threaten it. And if we have a good idea, it will stand the test of time. If we don't, let that idea be killed and let a better one be discovered later on. And so I think you're right, Marina, in that we must enable our clients to see the vision. And we do that primarily through making sure they understand the merit of each of the ideas that we're stacking together.
That's well put. I love that, because in internal architecture circles, it's pretty easy for everyone to just kind of complain about all the architects to complain about everyone else, including clients. But if you can, first of all, not always have that disposition in every minute of your life, that's a healthy thing. But also, like you said, have people understand what you're doing and have them buy into it sincerely. It makes a big difference. Actually, it's funny, because as you were talking, I was trying to think about that. And I sometimes, when there's clients as a husband and wife or two partners, they keep each other in check. And I've seen in the past where they both understand the project, but it's easy, like you said, for everybody, or in this example, one of the partners, to get kind of off track and start thinking about weird stuff. And the other partner's like, no, but if we do that, then we lose this whole idea that we have. And it's like, oh, okay, cool.
So
I don't have to I don't have to be the one to say it.
So there is hope that at least one of them will get it.
Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah, I agree with Rachel. Totally. And that's okay. So now it's 3 against 1.
Totally. And if the idea is good, let it be the thing that wins. And if it's a weak idea, then great. Maybe the other spouse has a good point.
True.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting that you guys have concept design in your office. And as you probably know, so do we, but not all offices have that. Sometimes their first phase is just schematic design. So I'm curious to know, have you always had concept design broken out separately? And why you feel that's you probably already answered, but why it's a necessary thing? Like, why not bundle that into schematic?
Yes. I'll admit there's probably many good ways of doing this, and there are masterful pieces of architecture that were probably designed very quickly. We used to start with the schematic design phase, mostly out of necessity. We were a young, tiny office, and there was practical concerns that we needed to address. As we have as we've made progress in finding clients who share our ambition of not just creating a functional home and not just creating a beautiful home, but again, feel free to roll your eyes at this, like creating a truly inspired home or creating something that feels poetic. Those are the clients who share our desire to aim at something higher. And I think the concept phase could be its own phase, like we do. I think it could also be a philosophy embedded within a more lengthy schematic design phase. My personal convictions are sometimes we get it right in the concept phase, but other times we get it wrong. And so I'm not going to be dogmatic about fighting for the original concept. I will be dogmatic about fighting for a good concept. And so sometimes it comes in the middle of the project, sometimes it comes in the beginning, sometimes it comes later in the project, but we want to find it eventually, because in my opinion, great architecture is both intellectually stimulating as well as meaningful in the embodied experience. In other words, my favorite homes have a great story, and I don't need to walk inside of them to be inspired. I can be told about the premise and the process, and I can like admire that. But also when I walk into these homes, like I feel goosebumps, and it's really, really hard to do. But that's, we're open about our ambition to create homes that are both intellectually and experientially compelling.
I think if I'm not mistaken, that was, I'm going back to our first interview with you, which was like a while ago. If I'm not mistaken, that was the same or very close to your original ambitions with starting the office. Like you wanted to have an office that was stellar in a 2 or 3 ways as opposed to just one of them.
You're totally right. From day one, we wanted to have an office that had a strong culture, or in other words, treated people right, but also did critical architecture. And I think it's hard to do one of those things. And it's really, really, really hard to do both. And we're not always successful at that, but we are unapologetic about that being our aim.
Yeah.
And I think our best projects get closest to that.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so we covered the first point of 5.
we kind of touched on the third chapter, the rhetoric of home, which talks about the message that architecture speaks. We reference Zumthor a lot in this chapter. I think that homes do communicate a sort of truth, right? You can tell me all about your family. I can meet your family, David and Marina. But when I enter your home, it will communicate reality in a way that is unlike anything else. Some truths are hard to even put into words, and a home is one of those things. And so, we are exploring 2 projects in that chapter. One is our first home, the Black Barn, and one is a more recent home, the SC Residence, or the Scalped Concrete House. And both of those projects included a client who was a partner with us in helping to identify the meaning of the project early. So for the Scalped Concrete home, our client came to us and they had this idea about using concrete in an unusual way. And the result was very different than what we thought we were aiming at. But the shared conviction was, how do we take a timeless material that is typically understood as being austere and a little bit cold and hard, and make it feel undulating and warm and organic, and a thing that you almost can't resist touching or raking your fingers across? And that, like, when you find that nugget and you can carry it 4 years from beginning to end, it's just so rewarding.
4 years. It's got to be rewarding after 4 years for sure. What's interesting about the 2 points of the 1 and 3, I think chapters is how you described it, is that both in both of them, there's this aspect of like delaying the end product or trying to get to there too soon. With the concept design, it's like I was calling it massing, and you were describing it, however you did. And then also with the rhetoric, it was more about like having a shared understanding with the client of where you're going, but not necessarily knowing where you're going to end up also in that case.
Yes, and I think it's a combination of discipline and flexibility. The discipline is we must find something poetic. That's the discipline. That's dogmatic. But the flexibility is the humility to say, we think we know what it is. Reality is going to test and confirm, or test and change that. And, we're gonna learn more. It's hard to, you can't imagine a 500-page novel on the first day. There's going to be surprises along the way. And so I feel like, architects are in this dance with reality of attempting to predict the future, but also hopefully, admitting when we don't get it right.
I'm always thinking as we architects, talk about like what a client would think or kind of like understand. And I very much love the, like what you're saying, that basically we're looking for something incredible, but we don't know when and how we're going to find it. Right. And that's kind of like what, clients embark on with us. And there is a tendency for, a lot of architects to try and latch on that incredible idea from the very beginning to reassure the client throughout the process, right? So I guess my question is, because that's how you guys operate in kind of like keeping things loose and flexible throughout, like how do you approach the client when you're, I don't know, in DD and be like, hey, guess what? Now we found what it is about. Like, we thought it was this, which was a great idea, but guess what? We finally found it. And let me tell you how wonderful it is. And now the client is sitting and like, what? I mean, I was sold on, the previous one. So what happened? So, I'm kind of curious to see, like, how do you guys, break the news, basically?
Break the news.
Yes.
That's okay. Yeah.
Well, if I just want to clarify, our own taste is not the measurement of where we want to head, right? And so
Right.
if it's not as though we wake up one morning with an idea that we like more. If we're excited about a change in direction, it's because there is merit. And if that merit cannot be communicated and understood, it's probably not merit. And so there have been many projects that have taken significant shifts, but always for good reason. We would never do that out of like leveraging our own authority as the architect or the design expert. It's because we have new data that we want to share. And the final chapter in the book is the authorship of home. And we are very open with the fact that we call it co-authorship, that we really believe that there is this dance between client and architect. And I just love this Rick Rubin quote: "We're not done until we all love it." And so that's the one agreement I ask for from my client before we sign them up. We have to love it and they have to love it. And as long as we can be patient to not settle for something until we get there, we've never not gotten there eventually.
Eventually. What you're saying makes complete sense. Rick Rubin is an interesting character. He's the what would be his word? His title? He's
Producer.
the older gentleman, crazy frizzy gray hair. That what's his title? He's like
I think producer. So I actually am not an expert in his career, but he seems to have a way of pulling out creativity from creatives in a new way. And I just, most people have read his book, The Creative Act. That was my favorite part, where he shared the one requirement he has with his artists. All I'm doing is like repeating the book, but we're not done until we all love it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've seen a few things with him. Like he had that not documentary, but I guess sort of documentary with Paul McCartney. He had an interview with Anderson Cooper, and it's a funny thing because when he's asked by people like, "What is it you do?" he's like, "I have no technical abilities. I can't play anything really." But basically, exactly as you said, his skill set, and I guess you'd say his talent, is to just help others find, like you said, pull out the creative juice or whatever it was. And it's a very interesting skill set to have because it's immaterial, but it's of extremely high value. And in a lot of ways, I was thinking it's kind of the same set of responsibilities that a design director or partner in an office would have. It's like somehow the ability to pull out the greatness in everybody, even though them themselves might not have the capacity to actually do that thing.
Exactly right.
So we skipped over chapter 2.
Chapter 2 is the sense of home. If place is the most inescapable quality of home, emotion or sense would be the most elusive. And I think there's, for a long time, been a visual dominance in architecture. And so chapter 2 is all about recovering some of these more neglected senses. It deals with understanding the way that touch and the way that certain daily rituals can influence what makes a space feel whole. It would be rare for an architect to ignore the visual beauty, and we are unapologetic about our pursuit of visual beauty. But we know that there are a lot of other ways that architecture can make you feel that we explore in this chapter.
I'm gonna have to get the book.
You haven't laughed at me, aren't you?
I'm gonna have to get the book. No, I think this is. I don't know.
Did you write the book with an understanding that the audience was going to be mostly non-architects or also
Or is the
architects?
audience mostly architects? I
Yeah.
mean, that would be also very interesting.
Okay, so truthfully, our ambition was to make it accessible to clients, architects, and non-architects. But truthfully, it's probably more interesting to people in the architecture industry. And I might even be so bold to say if you design homes, you'd be interested in this book because we are sharing a lot about our process and convictions of the themes, the tensions that we deal with when working with residential clients. We are trying to make it accessible though. So we're our bibliography is deep. We're trying to reference the best thinkers in each of these chapters, but we're speaking in plain English and talking to normal people.
Did you bring on board or hire a I don't know, dedicated writer, consultant, branding expert, or something like that to create the book and the text and all of these things? Or how does that process work? Or does the publisher provide those people for you?
Gosh, no is the short answer. I have an incredible team that helps me in-house. So our integrator is an incredible writer. Our design director is an incredible thinker. I like to stir the pot between the three of us and the rest of our team. And so, no, it was a homespun project.
Wow.
That's
That's
cool.
even more impressive.
That's cool. That's fun. So first of all, did we skip any chapters that we should talk about? Did we get to number 4?
Number 4 is the rhythm of home. It explores the problems with predictions. Homes are all about predicting how it will be used, and we explore some of the ways that architects get it wrong. I really think that Stuart Brand is an author who has written so intelligently about the way that the best architecture often has not hubris, but like a humble sense of flexibility because we cannot predict the way that these buildings are going to be used. And so we share examples around how we thought we were leaning into the rituals of a home and how in reality we learned something surprising. So there are 2 projects in this chapter. And I think in conclusion, I think for us, homes provide a structure for daily activities. And these activities, due to enormous accumulation, they end up changing our affections. And so I'm learning that I can shape rituals in addition to being responsive to pre-existing rituals. And I have to balance both of those things as we interview and interact with our clients.
Do you guys often have post-completion conversations with clients to understand how, but maybe just to touch base, but also more deeply to understand how they are moving or utilizing the house?
When you ask that question, part of me thinks, oh, I should be doing that. But the reality is we become so close with our clients that we get that feedback without even trying. I can tell you with great precision everything they're pleased with, everything they're disappointed in. And some of the greatest compliments are the clients who have literally hired us for a second and a third project. And their partnership as a not just a patron, not someone who writes a check, but as like a true creative partner is almost unparalleled. And it comes from wanting to do a better job each time.
I love that. I love that. And then more on like the logistics and mechanics of creating a book for the architects listening who aspire to someday create a monograph. Was there anything about that process that was surprising, more challenging than you thought it would be, easier than you thought it would be?
2 things. The first is going to not be surprising, but we got to do whatever we wanted. I thought there was going to be far more influence on what it should be called and how big it should be and what the strategy was. The truth is, we got to drive it, and so I was delighted to learn that. But I also learned that like the printing process is incredibly technical, and I care about line weights like every architect, and getting it to be right, and not only in thickness but in like gray tones was like mind-numbingly difficult. And so next time I'm just going to budget a lot more time and energy to get that right.
Wait, so what? So the first point you mentioned, I think is interesting because I also would have assumed maybe that the publisher would say like, if you do this format or this color or this whatever, it's not, it doesn't represent us as a publishing company perhaps, or it's not going to sell, or like whatever other parameters. But it sounds like you really had the ability to make it what you wanted, which is really, really cool.
You're probably right. I think both things are true. I guess I could state it better to say that the range of possibilities was wider than I had feared, and so that was a good thing for a creative. And I almost need to also backtrack on one of your early questions. We did hire an incredibly talented writer, Sam LaBelle, to write the introduction. So he has the intro chapter, and he's an LA writer, has done so many cool architecture books. And my goodness, he is talented at putting to words things that are sometimes hard to capture. So yeah, just so grateful for his partnership.
And then the second point of the challenges of getting the right grade tone and line weights. So
we would never be able to print a monograph. David would be way too
I was saying, that's what I said last night. I'm like, architects are like probably the worst clients for anything that's graphic because we're so picky. But so
picky.
Why would that be difficult? Because
because the machines that the books are printed on are massive machines. They're nothing like our little printers. And the humidity, the paper, the setup charge, all of these variables that are out of our control influence the way that the final result is. And so, if a line weight tolerance that you and I care about, David, is so tiny, but line weights can like be darker and lighter or fatter and skinnier based upon a lot of variables that are not directly in our control. And so it just takes so many test runs to actually get it right. And so you have 9 projects, which means you have 18 drawings. And if each drawing has 2,000 lines, you're doing your best to get it right, but you do a test print and it's wrong. And then you try again and again and again, you do another test print and it's wrong. And so it just takes so much effort to get it to where the architect who's so picky is like happy.
That's interesting because I would have thought, I guess most, publications, they're doing text, but I would have thought it wouldn't be that difficult. But I suppose so.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Particular people.
If you can't tell the difference between light gray 1 and light gray 2, you're not gonna have a problem. But like, it turns out we care about how light the light gray is.
Yeah, for sure. That's the case. It's the smallest thing sometimes. We have some renderers we use and like, seriously, you're nitpicking over that? I'm like, yeah, man, it's not right.
Yeah,
fix it.
What I tell my renderers is, you'll get used to me eventually.
That's brutal. What was I going to say? So once you guys had like the content assembled and the essays, written, how much time does it take to? I'm trying to get a sense of like the timeline for creating the book, aside from kind of the researching that happened at the beginning.
Broad brush, it took us about a year to assemble all the content and all the ideas. And then it took about another year to go from what I thought was an essay on my computer to an essay that like looked good on the page, had all the typos removed, looked good with, every neighboring page, and then got printed and distributed. So for the next book, we're going to budget 2 years, and it certainly took more effort than I could have ever guessed. But ultimately, I think it like going to the gym, it gave us some new muscles that I think are very useful as a team. And so that's what keeps me optimistic about the future of architectural publishing, as well as our little involvement in it.
The new muscles, are you thinking that what are the new muscles? Like the ability to kind of self-critique the work more continuously, or?
Yes, that would be at the top of the list. How do we reflect truthfully on what is noteworthy about our work? But then also more tactically, how do we record the work, capture the work, organize the work such that it's not an overwhelming effort to package it?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's like we have so much stuff to do already that to keep track of these things, and the way you're describing it's like, oh man, it's another thing, another hat to wear.
It is, but at the same time, if you can nail an efficiency to it, then you can duplicate the usage of the thing you just did, right? So it is.
Let me know when you find that.
I'm working on it still. I don't have a solution.
We had an architect on the show a while ago, and we talked about this with him, and he I forget his method, but basically I think it's a notes app on his phone. He does something, just constantly writing whatever the ideas are, and then I don't think he's probably evolved to something much more structured and elaborate by now, but he was like, if I don't do that throughout the entire process, there's no way I'm going to remember that there's this really cool key idea that I came up with during concept design that made its way through the end. But from that point, when the idea is so at the forefront, to the end of the project, like you said, could be years and years. What do you remember from 3 years ago? So yeah, it's a difficult one. So do you have an idea of when the second one's going to come
out? Loosely 3 years away. And
that's pretty soon.
It is. It's based upon us projecting when will the next body of work be done. So those are, all those projects are in the works right now. And as you both know, it takes, just because a project is started doesn't mean it'll be finished. And so we're going to work very hard to complete the work, and we're committed to the discipline of telling the story, to the point of this other architect using the Notes app. The thing that helped us, the most helpful habit, was meeting weekly with my team to kind of keep the conversation alive. And so we had a shared Coda document. It's just this database of images and text, and having that weekly rhythm was kind of the backbone of making sure this thing pushed forward.
How do I shape that question? Did what you learned from producing the first book impact your design thinking for current or future projects, in going kind of all the way back to the idea of an architect having a manifesto? Like, did reflecting on the work so deeply bring clarity to common goals or agendas, let's say, that would be a through line through all of the work?
That's certainly our ambition. The essays stand in parallel to a different document that we haven't published publicly, but we call it the shared design language. And that's what is most closest to what you're calling a manifesto. It's like our true convictions with as much definition as possible in each of the categories that we care about. And so, yes, right now we are actively trying to refine that document. And I think that'll be done this year, which means that next year we'll probably start the essays for the second book.
So interesting. It's so interesting, because I also imagine for people who are not architects, are like, wow, I had no idea that architects were so intellectual about things, that we would spend time to think and write and to reflect so much about the work to make the work better, to drive it forward to whatever, as opposed to just making things look pretty, which is also not easy to do.
I hear you. Yeah. And again, my goal is not to make it esoteric. So, let's say we all design homes, but I think it's good to spend time reflecting on, do we even have a shared definition of what home is? And it doesn't need to be complicated. For us, it's the primary place of shelter and belonging. And so just, I just love the effort that is required to get to a level of specificity so that we have a shared language, right? I'm not a sole practitioner. I used to be, but now I have a team. And the more that I can align with them on what we mean when we're even using these very simple terms, the better, because we're using the terms. That's where I think like pausing long enough to define it is going to help us go farther.
And I think the profession as a whole really struggles with making what we do accessible. Actually, I meant that in terms of language, but it's financial. That's definitely the case as well. But in terms of rhetoric and how we talk about things, it's.
I was wondering, like, out of the 9 homes in the book, have the clients of those homes like seen the book, read the book? Like, did you get feedbacks from them? Like, were some of them surprised or like, it's like super excited by understanding, like, kind of like the behind the curtain work that went into.
Why is my photograph not in the book? I have this portrait I gave you.
Marina, that was by far the most special part because we got a few advance copies before the release date, and I was able to literally go to the home of each of the clients, knock on the door, give it to them. And I'll tell you one quick story. The very first client to hire us to design their home did so despite their better judgment. We had never designed a home until we designed their home. And for them to not only love their home, but feel like it had something to contribute to the greater industry, it just literally made her cry in that moment. And so it's just so special because, I worked hard on it, but I promise you she worked harder on it. And so that idea of co-authorship and to have her story told in that way is just so, so, so special. And in a way, I almost feel like that alone is worth it because like you've already referenced, our tendency is just to move on to the next thing. That's certainly my tendency as well. And this little project forced us to slow down, reflect, and kind of capture all of the lessons and the little treasures for projects that are most meaningful to these families. And were certainly part of our creative journey.
Yeah. That is a wonderful note to end it on. We have a question we always ask, which we've asked you before, but maybe you can just name a different
changed.
one.
I mean, yeah.
What is your favorite building?
I'll say, well, my most common answer is the Gamble House by Green and Green in Pasadena.
Yeah.
It is simultaneously new, but also native. So to invent a new approach in 1908, for that to still be so relevant 100 years later is amazing. And then a couple years ago, I got to visit Ray Cappy's house, and the fluidity of the spaces as it cascades down the hill was just so incredible. And I feel like if you're going to practice residential architecture, LA is such an inspiring place to practice because, some of the best in the world was born here.
Ray Cappy was a beast. It's crazy. It's also interesting to think that some of the best works of architecture in the residential space or any space were done like a long time ago. And I don't know what that means exactly, but it's like, wow, they were able to produce something so amazing back when we didn't have all this technology and whatever. And
they were making little models, with cardboards and wood sticks.
This is another conversation, but it makes me wonder.
Glue on their hands, cuts on their fingers. Yeah, I mean.
And the density of those amazing projects in LA is crazy.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It's true. It's definitely true. Anthony, thank you so much for making the time to come on here again and talk about your book. I think you've definitely teased everyone who's listening for sure. And this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And we'll continue the conversation. Definitely.
Thanks for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the show, the best way to do it is to leave a review of it in the Apple Podcast app or Spotify. And you can also I think you can leave reviews on Spotify. You can also subscribe and like and follow on YouTube, where all of our interviews are video recorded and our more informative, structured conversations are video recorded as well. If you want some just casual chat, that's off the record, then After Hours is where you want to be. And there's no video for that one, for that type of episode. We have our website, which is Second Studio Pod, and all of the 400, probably like 90, 400, I don't know, whatever number of episodes is up there. And on Instagram, on social media, we're on Instagram, and our handle is Second Studio Pod, so follow us there as well. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We have more great guests, great topics coming up. And if you have suggestions of guest topics or questions you'd want answered, then text our hotline, which is 213-222-6950, or DM us. Talk soon. Bye.